All right, hello AP Seminar. Sorry for that delay. I wasn't sure if it was actually recording, and I see that it is. Okay, so today we're going to walk back through EOC Part B. I figured a video would be easier so that you guys can go at the level you need to go in, at the speed you need to go at. All right, so the first step, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to walk you through the folders and everything that we will be talking about for today. So if you go to your Schoology page, which you should be able to see on my screen now, I'm going to do it this way, I think. Yeah. So you should be able to see this is our home page. So this is very familiar to you guys. We're in the EOC folder because, again, we are done with all the performance tasks and everything of that nature. We're going to be focused on Part B today, not Part A, which we did last week. We'll talk more about that before the exam time, but Part B has much more details and needs a little bit more attention. So we're going to focus on that today. So we're going to look at Part B. So just a reminder, in this folder, I've stored the stuff we did previously in this previous practice folder. So don't worry about all that stuff. It's there for you if you want to reference it again. But just as a reminder, the question never changes, just like Part A. Those 3 questions will always be the same. It's the same for Part B. And so here are the directions that you will get no matter what these sources are. It says, read the 4 sources carefully, focusing on a theme or issue that connects them and the different perspectives each represents. Then write a logically organized, well-reasoned, and well-written argument that presents your own perspective in the theme or issue you identified. You must incorporate at least 2 of the sources provided and link the claims in your argument to supporting evidence. You may also use the other provided sources or draw upon your own knowledge. In your response, refer to the provided sources as source A, source B, source C, or source D, or by the author's name. Write your response to Part B only on the designated pages in the free response booklet. So just a couple of reminders. 1, it is handwritten, so you'll be writing in a response booklet on the day of the exam. Number 2, this is very similar to what you did previously for performance task 2, where you got a series of stimulus material, and then you derive an argument based on that. For task 2, obviously, you got to do more research outside of it and spend more time doing that research, so you have less on that end, but it's the same idea where they give you sources, you derive an argument, and then you use the sources to defend your argument. So let's take a look at the rubric. And then I'm going to give you guys actually time where you're going to pause and you're going to do some reading. So I'm going to do a lot of presenting information, letting you guys see a high performance task, and then you will actually do this yourself as well. So if we look at the rubric, which is here, I'll zoom in so we can see it better. There are 4 rows to the rubric. So number 1, or let's go out of order, just because I think it's a little bit easier to visualize in that way. So rubric row 4 is all about those conventions. So using proper grammar, using proper style, and making sure it's clear writing are easy ways to get all 6 points. What they're also looking for is that you're using a sophisticated vocabulary. So they're not looking for basic words. They're looking for your expanded vocabulary based on a year of seeing academic work and academic research using the same verbiage that you would read in those sources in your papers. And you'll get to see an example of that, but just making sure it's an academic style paper and not written like, I hate to use the example of an FSA, but an FSA often isn't used at the highest level of writing. And so we want to make sure we're writing at a higher level. So that's rubric row 4. That should be a very easy 6 points. Rubric row 3, again, all of these are going to be 6 points maximum for a total of 24 points total. So to get a high response, selecting and using evidence. So make sure you are appropriately synthesizing relevant information drawn from at least 2 sources. So you must use at least 2 of the sources they give you in your paper. And it's like similar to the stimulus material. You need to use them in an effective way. So it shouldn't be that you just mention them vaguely or talked about like a source, but you use them to kind of construct the argument, and it's clear that you use them in that manner. Also making sure you use them correctly. So don't misrepresent what the source is saying in order to force your argument upon the reader. Make sure you use the argument or the source in the manner in which it's presented. So if they're arguing in one direction, you have to use that as yours as well. Again, that should be very easy 6 points because it's just applying evidence to your argument, which is something you have done now at least twice, plus the many, many years you've been taking English and other courses at school. Rubric row 2 and 1 are the ones that are a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult, but not impossible to get. So rubric row 2 is all about creating a logical line of reason. So it's well organized, it's well developed, it's clear, and it's convincing. So you're not piecemealing together evidence to really create this kind of skeleton of an argument, and it's very vague. It's your argument from start to finish should be clearly organized. So this is where it's recommended to create a mini outline, I mean, as speedily as possible, because again, you are on a time constraint, but forming that quick outline helps. So you can make sure everything is logically argued, right? So I'm going to put in this body paragraph these two sources which talk about this perspective. In this paragraph, I'll put two other perspectives. In this paragraph, I'll put a counter perspective maybe because I want to show both sides. And then I will wrap everything up in my conclusion. Just kind of breaking down the argument logically and making sure that your reader can follow that logic. And then again, explaining how the connections between evidence and your claim are there. Very similar. Again, elaboration is always key. So make sure you are elaborating on that. And then there's rubric row 1, which is essentially the content of the entire response. So the response identifies a theme or issue connecting the provided source and presents a perspective that is not represented in one of the sources. So you have to do one of these three things. So one, you either have to take the theme. So the 4 sources or 3 sources will have a common theme between them. You have to take them and present a perspective that is not represented in one of the sources. So maybe you know about this idea and you want to present it from the perspective of maybe in your PT2, you did a lot about psychology and they didn't respect a psychologist's perspective. And so you're going to bring in that perspective to really continue the argument that the 4 sources had, or you're going to create a new argument using that perspective to help get there. So that's the first one. The second is it brings a particularly insightful approach to one of the perspectives. So maybe there is a perspective that's there that's not really expanded in the direction you think it can go in, and you can kind of discuss further that perspective, give it more beef, if you will, right? Beef it up a little bit more and bring a new approach to it, right? How can I take this idea that this perspective says this, I'm going to continue that argument to link it to a new thing, right? Kind of like an equation, like A plus B equaling C. I'm going to add the B in there so that it equals C kind of deal. And then last, makes a strong thematic connection among the perspectives. So they will have a theme to them. There's an understood theme, but you could come up with a new theme that really isn't clear in all of them, connect the 4 sources to that theme, and then construe a new argument that is also aligned with that theme. So again, you have choices here. The easiest, I mean, it just really depends on your skill. So I'm not even going to say that this is an easier method. It's going to depend on the sources, and it's going to depend on your recollection of those skills. So that's the rubric. So what I want you guys to do now is you're actually going to pause here in a second. Remember, everything is in this folder that I showed you before. So the Part B exam prep folder. The rubric I just went over is right there, so you can access it and read through it again. You can go slowly, fast, however you want to look through it. I want you to open up the EOCB practice motivation. That's going to be the sources that were used in this example that we're actually going to go through. So it is going to look like not this, like this. You will see all the sources there. So I'm going to give a pause. You should pause the video and you should read through all of those sources. Okay. That was the pause. Hopefully you paused. You should have read the sources. But in there, you should see that there's this real connection between the sources. This only had 3. No, this one had 4. My apologies. So this one had 4 sources. You will have 4 sources on yours as well. So this one really had a common theme of like that motivation. What motivates someone to do something? So the first one talked about the Harvard study that was about using positive motivators as opposed to negative motivators. They talked about the doctors. They talked about how, or nurses rather, washing of the hands happened better when there was a positive reinforcement as opposed to a negative, and a little bit more of the science there. They gave a biblical verse that talked a little bit more about like how you should feel or exhibit your rewards. They talked about Tom Sawyer and how he motivated others to do his work for him. So he made them paint the fence for him, which was like I mean, reverse psychology essentially. And then this last one is talking about, it's more of a data-driven paper. And it's kind of talking about gender discrepancies with the Nobel Prizes. And essentially, so how you could derive it to motivation if you wanted to. And again, you don't have to use all the sources. You could definitely leave out a source if it doesn't work with your research, but it's talking more about seeing more gender, your gender receiving Nobel Prizes motivates you more to do that. So the existence of having more females winning Nobel Prizes makes females more motivated to get into science and do those types of things. Without directly saying that, right? That's kind of what they're construing there. And again, you can interpret the sources in your own way. So if you read it in a totally different way and you saw the direction going, you can definitely use it. So if this Nobel Prize made you think of something that you can also connect to the biblical verse or the Harvard study, then that can be your new perspective, right? That can be the new argument, and that's driving your argument, and that's fantastic. Or you can stick to what the theme is they have and take it in pick a new perspective for it. So now I'm going to have you guys pause again, and I want you to go back to that folder. You're going to open up this EOC high motivation. That's the high scoring EOC Part B. That's related to the same source pack that we just read through. I want you to pause. I want you to read it in its entirety. It is clear handwriting, so it's pretty simple to read through. You will see it looks like this. None of it is bad handwriting or chicken scratch. So you can read through the whole thing to see a high scoring. Again, this is a perfect score. Actually, it got all of the 6s on all the rubrics. So read through it, and then we will discuss here in a moment. So pause. Okay, so I'm assuming you paused and you have read it. That's the expectation, and so you should have done so. So if you read through this, you can see that this student did something actually pretty easy, if in my mind at least, right? They took the same idea, like very clearly that first article talks about positive reinforcement. They decided to take that motivation factor and use it to talk about motivation, not in the workplace, which is what the first source was talking about, but motivation in schools. So new perspective, right? The same argument that positive reinforcement is what really motivates people to do better. They decided to look at it in the perspective of a student and how you can apply that to schooling. And that's really, I mean, a very simple way of taking the sources and making a new argument. So they start by giving that introduction, right? Talking about motivation in schools, talking about, they connected it to real world events, which was the COVID crisis, and about in-person and at-home learning and how to apply it there. But then you can see their arguments here. Schools are not motivating students enough, but they can implement more rewards and incentives to solve the issue. So they identified a problem, and they're using this data, the same argument, to come up with a solution and argue that the solution is more effective. Couple of things to note. They did bring in 2 sources, and we'll talk about that. They brought in more than just 2 sources. They talked about a couple of different sources, but they also brought in a lot of their knowledge. So by making it a school-based, they had a lot of prior knowledge to use to drive their argument because, again, they're a student in school. And so you'll notice that they'll bring in information and data that's not necessarily cited because it's from their own knowledge, which is acceptable as in AP. That's fine as long as it's your knowledge. You don't have to cite exactly where it came from because it's your common knowledge or it's your knowledge that you have. But on that same token, you can't make up stuff. So if you don't know, then you can't put it in there unless it's in the sources that you have. If you do have information, let's say you studied something in your previous performance tasks or way back when we did performance task 1, and you remembered some bit of information, you can bring that into your paper, and you don't have to do the full citation for it because it's your common knowledge and they're expecting you to bring in that knowledge like we saw in the rubric row. So they argue their point. They talk about, they break down their argument effectively. They use some highly effective language in their writing as well. So we can see, sorry, I'm just adjusting some of my windows here so I can make sure I can see through it as well. So let's go through rubric row by rubric row, but we'll go in reverse because I really do think that's an easier way of looking at the rubrics, is going by the easiest rows to the hardest rows. So number 4, rubric row 4, which again, as a reminder, and you can have your rubric open if you want to, is all those conventions. So they use very clear writing. It's communicated clearly. They're using a academic language, and it's clear. So they give a quote: "The pandemic has highlighted the motivation problem in schools," right? And then they talk about the results of the study can be translated to schools. So it's not basic fourth grade words, it's at a sophisticated level, so that they're not, again, you don't need to use an expanded vocabulary of esoteric terms that bring in an ambiance of, it doesn't need to be like that. It just needs to be academic based. That's the goal, is that you're bringing in an academic verbiage into your writing, and that it's clear that you are an academic writing this. There are some errors, and like with everything in AP and ACE and all of those types of things, if there's one or two errors that doesn't detract from your writing, it's fine, right? You can make a spelling mistake, you can make one or two mistakes, but don't make them regularly. So if there's a word you don't know how to spell, don't continuously write that word misspelled, because then that's going to detract from your writing, and then you're going to lose points. So be strategic about the words that you use, making sure you know how to use them correctly. It's accurate information. It attributes the sources that it does cite. And remember, you can just simply call them source A, source B, source C, and you don't need a works cited page at the end. So it's a lot easier there, but you make sure you're using them in the MLA citation. So using your parenthetical citations, always before the period. Don't put them after the period. Make sure you format them correctly. And then it signals between the sources too. So it's all very clear, and it's in the writing is good. So they got all 6 points in conventions. Again, that's the easiest row. Write clearly, write concisely, write academically, and you got 6 points right off the bat. So let's talk about their evidence. So they do draw the connections between the different sources. So they start with this. They talk about how you form your understanding with the Bible passage. So that it starts with that sort of building your morality type deal, and then it transitions into the Harvard study. So they really effectively use their evidence, because the biblical passage is not necessarily an academic paper. It is not necessarily a reliable source. I know that's kind of a faux pas thing to say for someone who might be religious and really see the Bible as truthful, but that's not everyone. So therefore, it can't be 100% academic based, right? So they transition. They still used it, and you can still use it as a source, because a lot of people derive their morality from the Bible, so they're able to make that connection to it. But then they segue from that into the Harvard study to make it a stronger, more robust evidence, while still using the Bible, because they were able to do that. The fourth paragraph does so. Remember to make sure you're varying your perspectives within your paragraph. So using multiple sources in your paragraphs is recommended, whether it's you relating your sources to information you have and your knowledge, which is what they did most of the time. So if you see here in this paragraph, they use a lot of source A, but they relate source A to their own experience with schools and motivation. So they connect their knowledge, which is a source and a perspective, to the information from the source pack and source A. In the fourth paragraph, which is here, they really solely rely on source C, but so that they're isolating a paragraph to one source, which is not recommended, but they do it in an effective way. So it connects it to I'm trying to word myself correctly here. So it's connecting between students who want to do something and those who do not, which again really does bring us back to source A. Even though they don't reference it, they're referencing back to that source A idea that the Harvard study talked about the non-motivation of doing something, you're not going to do it. So they make that connection. So it does seem like it's just source A, but they connect it to ideas that were relevant in other sources. And then at the end, what they do is they discuss a solution, or they make I guess it's solution. They come up with their own idea of using this confetti as your motivation to turn in work in school, right? If you turn in an assignment and you get confetti every time, that's going to be a positive motivator. And based on the information I previously stated, that's going to make you more willing or more motivated to turn in your work at schools on time. So they connect all their evidence. They kind of wrap up their argument there, but they still reference and link everything together. So they got their selective use of evidence perfectly fine as well, which also is very relevant to row 2. So row 2 and row 3 do really work together very well. I mean, all the rows work together well, let's be honest. But they organize their evidence in a manner that it's a clear argument, right? They talk about first what motivates people. They talk about the positive motivation factor, and then they connect that to schools and how students are unmotivated based on the different learnings, being at home, what needs to be turned in, doing things just for a grade, not wanting to do things even if you enjoy them because it's for a grade. They connect everything in a line of reasoning that makes a lot of sense, and therefore they scored 6 points on Rubric Row 2 as well. And then finally, Rubric Row 1, which is the creme de la creme of this whole project. It shows a thorough understanding of all the source material, so making sure they didn't misconstrue any of the evidence, right? They clearly saw the theme, which was motivation, and they went with the motivation factor. But they brought in their unique perspective of connecting it to schools and virtual schools. They didn't just repeat the arguments made. So like they did really rely on source a ton, right? They basically use source A as their primary source, but it wasn't as though they were restating source A. They retooled source A to fit within the classroom environment. And that's why they got those 6 points on row 1, because they were able to they applied it in a new perspective. And so that's how they were able to get all the points. So again, this is a perfect paper. This is what is expected of you when the environment comes. When it comes time to testing, you'll get your 4 sources, you'll read through them, you'll derive your theme or whatever manner in which you're going to address it, whether it's a brand new solution that nothing in that pack talked about but aligned with the theme, or whether it's taking the theme in a new direction, like they said in the other one. So making sure you're able to do those types of skills. So what you're going to do now, and I haven't put it in there yet to show you on this to share my screen, but there will be an assignment here where you are going to get 4 sources and you are going to attempt this on your own. You are actually going to handwrite this because I think that's a skill we need to practice, and then we will review and go over your responses to see how well that you performed. Just some logistical understanding. Remember, for the entire EOC, you have 2 full hours, but that's for part A and part B. So it's recommended you spend only 30 minutes on part A, which is the 3 questions. So breaking down your time in that manner. So you spend only 30 minutes there. So you can save 90 minutes for part B, because it does take a bit more time because you have to read the source material and then come up with an argument and establish it in a multi-paragraph essay. So save yourself the 90 minutes. You have everything in front of you on the day of the exam, so you don't have to start with part A. You can start with part B. That's completely up to you. I personally, just because I don't know if you want to hear my perspective, but I would start with part A because I'm a linear thinker, and going out of order tends to wig me out. But I would start with part A because it kind of builds up that stamina. It's an easier task. It kind of gets the brain flowing, and then move from part A to part B. But if you're a person that wants to start with part B, you can do that. What will happen on the day of the exam, and you'll see, I'll try and find an example paper you can look at. You'll actually label each page of what you're answering so that they know that you're answering question 1, question 2 of part A, question 3 of part A, or you're answering question part B. So you can do them in the order as long as it's labeled. But again, saving yourself that time is crucial because 90 minutes is really the ideal. If it's a little less than 90 minutes, obviously it depends on your own skills. Maybe you're quicker at creating arguments than others, in which case you don't have to save that time. And you can do less time for part B and more time for part A. It's up to you, but the recommendation is that 30 minutes for part A and 90 minutes for part B is traditionally the order in which, or the time that is there. Also remember, there's no break between them, so you'll have the 2 hours to sit down and take the essay. No breaks. So bathroom, you use it, you're wasting time. So recommend use the bathroom before, or wait until after to do that so you don't waste any time. Trying to think of any other. It is handwritten again, so remember to use a clear and concise handwriting. If you make a mistake, just simply cross it out. It doesn't have to be like perfect. You saw in that person's response there were some mistakes they scribbled out, and that's okay. You can do that as well, but making sure that the readers can read your handwriting, because if they can't read it, reasonably read it, they'll do their very best, and more than one reader will look through it. But if they can't read it, they can't score you, and so that creates problems for your overall score as well. So make sure you're writing clearly. If you are a bad handwriting person like myself, I'm going to be honest about it, make sure you're giving yourself enough time to write a little slower or to go back and rewrite things that you might need to rewrite. And that's all. So hopefully you were able to get a good understanding of Part B again, because this is not the first time we've talked about it. And now you're going to practice it. So go ahead and start that assignment, and see you in class.